Well, hello everybody. This is Pastor Dale, and so excited to begin this new class called Building the Church from the Ground Up. I believe that from the time that I was just a teenager, 16, almost 50 years ago, that the calling on my life was to help plant, grow, and multiply kingdom families. It was to be a spiritual entrepreneur, nearer to see the possibility of something God wanted to start and then to develop it the way a farmer would an orchard, from a seed to an orchard till it multiplied. And, it began so small, and I was 16, and I started in my high school, Burgess High School, and it was just, I remember gathering three people, said, we need to reach this high school. And they said, okay, what do we do? I said, well, let's start a Bible study. I wasn't sure who was supposed to lead. I think we went around and they found out that I had been walking with the Lord for 2 or 3 months. And they said, well, you're the oldest Christian here. And God used that in an amazing way. It grew to as many as 100 kids. And I saw what God did in the school. Revival came as a part of that time. In fact, part of my heritage. And I want to just give you my story because I'm hoping this class is really a mentoring thing. And I want you to know my heart. I was a part of a great move of God called the Jesus Chapel move. In fact, when I felt the call to the ministry, to this day, I felt like I received like the fire on the altar of revival that I was to steward for my whole life. And wherever I've led, I've tried to put that at the forefront. As a young man, I married my wife, Sharon, and what's a blessing about her, and you're going to hear from her in these classes, is she is also a spiritual entrepreneur, and amazing, especially when it comes to kids and kids ministry. And you'll see part of the vision of Heart for the World strategy centered around kids. We've said it before that we're a ministry for kids, and adult care is provided. And so her ability to create an environment where kids became a focus and brought families to the Lord began to mark our ministry. It began to mark it not only in the U.S., but as a way of planting churches and multiplying God's work through ministries of feeding, educating kids, especially in the Philippines, Zambia, Mexico, and other places. We began a church as newly married, 20 years old, 21, in El Paso, Texas. It was our first church plant called Jesus Chapel Northeast. And it was, it was just a neat adventure because I was a youth pastor for my dad and felt this burden. One day I had a dream for Northeast El Paso. And it was sort of funny because I saw this hand, coming out of Dyer Street there. And Northeast had a reputation of being kind of the rough area, especially that part of Dyer Street. And I saw this oppression and darkness. It was so funny because when I was just a kid, 3 or 4 years old, I had a dream in which I felt two things. I had felt one time this awful feeling of a hand coming out from my bed that terrified me, that I cried out to God. And then shortly after, I had a dream that I would grow up and be a missionary. I told the Lord, no, thank you. But all of a sudden, I saw that hand. It was almost like the Lord saying, you were born for this. You were born to break Satan's power. And he spoke a lot of things to me. And so I'm just a kid, and I don't know very much. But over a period of time, we were able to develop a team. In fact, many of you know Sue Yeager's one of our teachers. Russ and her were part of that original team in literally 1979. And God birthed something, and He taught us so much. We actually, over our lifetime, planted a church there the first 20 years. Then we planted Heart for the World Church in Las Cruces. And both churches became not only churches that grew into a pretty healthy size, over 1,000 people, but became multiplying churches that planted other churches. Well, then in about 1987, God turned my world upside down by calling me into missions and calling me through this wonderful pastor, Pastor Levi, to come to the Philippines. And that's a long story. But again, there was a vision like the map of Bonanza, and this fire that would go across the map of the Philippines, then it would go to all the nations. And God says, I want you to start fire. At the time, the Lord, very quickly after that, connected us with Vineyard, the Vineyard Church movement, which is a church planting movement. And I had the incredible privilege to have hands laid on me by John Wimber, the founder of the Vineyard, to be sent out as the pioneer representative to start Vineyard churches in the Philippines. What an amazing journey that was. And during that time, we saw over 20 Vineyard churches planted. In that process, God began to put in my heart that the key was compassion, and the key was having his heart of mercy and asking his presence to come to the poorest of the poor. And it became an amazing heart of the world. That became the focus of the mission we began to call. And we started a mission called Heart for the World, which at first was a missions ministry focused on church planting. A few years later, we came to Las Cruces, and I just want to mention this to give you a background. But during that time, there was a number of churches, both here, the Philippines, and then in Mexico, that became birthed. And the key at that point had to do a lot with, as I said, compassion. I just want you to hear this, because as you develop your own gifting, you'll find that God puts this inner sense of a DNA of what you are to reproduce. There were two big things. One was that God was going to reproduce church for the nations, not just a church, but a church that existed for the places where there weren't enough churches and where there was such great need. The second was, it was around compassion and kids. Right about that time, our youngest daughter, Molly, we adopted her. We get a phone call that a baby was available. They asked if we wanted to adopt. It was such a surprise. She was addicted to heroin. It was such a sad thing. And God gave a prophetic word through my wife that Molly would be a picture what God could do with those who, in the world's terms, were born losers, were hopeless. And Molly is a picture, a poster child of someone who grew up and became a nurse, became this kind of person. God says, I want to do that all over the world. I want you to find the least, and I want to show them how they can become the greatest, and through them change the world. And so that became the heartbeat. Shortly after that, the Lord supernaturally called us to start what we had done in the Philippines. We made a 20-year commitment, and I went there every year, and my heart's still in the Philippines. But then God showed us the orphans of Zambia. And it was so funny, because I wake up in the middle of the night and I hear these cries, and I don't know, I thought it was something coming from my vent in my room, and I went out in the living room 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm praying, and I'm saying, what is this, Holy Spirit? And God says, it's the cries of the orphans of Africa. It was right at the turn of the century, and the epidemic of AIDS was at its height in Africa. And there were so many orphans. And I said, okay, God, I'm willing. What are we supposed to do? Yes. And over the next 3 months, I got several invitations, including a man literally walking up to the door saying, I've never met you before, but I was in California, and someone said to come to Las Cruces and find Dale Walker and to ask you, would you come to Ndola, Zambia, and help us take care of the orphans? And anyhow, I went there, met Pastor Damas and Glenda Kamfwa, began involved in the Vineyard movement in Zambia. It became a launching pad today Our children, my daughter Heidi and Chris are there with Orchard Ministries. And a beautiful thing happened. God also has started the same kinds of thing on the border with NAPRA and Mexico. One of our first churches as a Las Cruces church was to plant a church in Janos, Mexico. And it's just an amazing story. And then Ascension. And all along the border now, we're getting to partner with Acuna, Mexico, Juarez, and Palomas, and many other places. In 2013 was our first big send where our church sent out church planters, Hunter and Liz to Atlanta, Johnny and Jenny Terrazas to plant Hope City, El Paso, and Chris and Heidi to Zambia. And shortly after that, we also helped work with Junar and Jasmine as they've planted the Heart for the World Church in El Paso, Texas. Well, as all of this happened, in this recent last year, the Lord reminded me of a very specific word. We've been here now for about 26 years, whatever, in Las Cruces. And back in 1992, it was funny because it was right in the middle of a wedding. And in the middle of the wedding, as the bride is coming down, and now I know about what I've learned about visions and dreams, that they're prophetic. And this is a dream about the bride that God was going to call me to. And the dream was, the Lord says, I've given you a ministry that's 20-20-20. The first 20 was learning to be a pastor. The second 20, a missionary. Now the third 20 will be to be a multiplier. And I want you to give your heart, not just for your ministry, but now to come alongside pastors to plant, to grow, and to multiply churches in the nations of the world. And that third part of my life came about a couple years ago. With that came the vision of this school, Heart for the World School of Missions and Ministry. And God says this school is going to be dedicated to raising up spiritual entrepreneurs and leaders to plant ministries. And the Lord told me a couple things. One, just reminded me that the greatest churches that will ever be planted are about to be planted. And the greatest ministries that are ever to be birthed are about to be birthed. And that he was calling me to get ready to come alongside a whole generation of young leaders that are being called right now. They're being prepared. They're going to start amazing ministries that are more unbelievable than anything we've ever seen. The Lord reminded me, and what the heart of this class is about, was the fact that his ultimate strategy for the nations is centered around the multiplication of kingdom families. When Jesus said, "Go into all the world and make disciples," he spoke specifically of what we know happened in the book of Acts. These kingdom communities were spawned all over the world, and they took the gospel to the ends of the earth. Someone said the greatest path of evangelism, of reaching the world, is multiplying kingdom families. It's also the highest purpose of the church. You know, someone said that the purpose of an apple tree is not just to have apples, but it's to plant other apple trees. And I believe with all my heart that within every ministry, within every Christian, their calling is to reproduce, to fulfill what Jesus said in Genesis 1. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And I believe that may not always include, everybody's not supposed to plant a church, but many are called to plant, whether it's a life group, a ministry, a business that touches the world, a career in medicine that has a multiplication of ministry. And it touched me because I learned recently that though this idea of multiplication is all through the Bible, only 4% of churches multiply other churches. And I don't believe it has anything to do with their capacity to do it, but it's just getting outside of the box and focusing on what that means. And so I want to bring a vision of that. As we started the school, the Lord gave me another neat vision, was way back when we began sending out missionaries, the Lord gave me a vision that Heart for the World was like an aircraft carrier, and all of these planes would land and go out of them. But then he said, now, in this season, and it was so funny because I was in Atlanta visiting our church plant there, and I went through this restaurant, and they had a picture where in Atlanta, they had one of the biggest airplane manufacturing companies. And I saw them putting airplanes together, and the Lord said, now Heart for the World is becoming an aircraft, not just an aircraft carrier, but an airplane manufacturing plant. And so this is my passion, is to help people and to go through the process from the very, very beginning of a thought from God to a ministry that not only is fruitful, but then it multiplies over and over. So here's a few keys to the vision of this class. One, as I said, is to stir the flames in people who are spiritual entrepreneurs, who have in their heart, I'm supposed to give birth to something, a work, a ministry, a kingdom business, a kingdom school, could be feeding ministry, it could be rescue the trafficking victims. How do you do that? How do you go from a dream inside of you to a ministry that is reaching people and multiplying it? It is to take advantage of this incredible moment in history where God is bringing new wineskins. It's so amazed to me that during this pandemic, when people have been closed in, hundreds of thousands of new ministries have been birthed over the internet. There's all kinds of new ways of doing church, new wineskins, campus churches, micro churches, home churches, online churches. The potential has never been so great. And over, one of my life verses comes back to that. The harvest is plentiful, Jesus says, Matthew 9. But the laborers are so few. Please pray. Please pray. And I pray. And those who know me, I pray. Every week I'm praying, God, send leaders for the harvest. Send people who will raise up people, who will reach people and teach people and multiply the kingdom around the world. I believe that innovative, creative, new ways of multiplying ministry are being formed. I believe revival fire. I almost felt like I had a word that says, all I need is fire pits, and I will send the fire. Build it and I will come, the whole idea. One of the backgrounds that I want to share this class, this is not going to be so much a class on information as it is impartation. It's not going to be so focused on methods. This is not a book, How to Plant a Church, as much as a focus on the grace journey of a spiritual entrepreneur, how to trust God, how to believe God, whatever it is, for the money, whatever it is, to get the next state, to overcome the next hardship in the journey towards what God has called you. A key verse I want to read you is in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 5 to 11. 1 Corinthians 3, 5 to 11. And Paul is talking about his apostolic ministry, which was to plant churches all over the world. And then he explains it. He says, what, after all, is Apollos and what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe. This is 1 Corinthians 3, 5. As the Lord assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered, but God made things grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and they will be rewarded according to their labor. For we are co-workers in God's service, and you are God's field and God's building. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and someone else is now building on it. But take care how you build, for no other foundation can be built than the one it's already laid, Jesus Christ. Know that some build with gold, silver, and costly jewels, but other with hay and straw. In the end, the fire will reveal the true nature of each person's work. If it's built right, it will survive. If it's built wrong, it will suffer great loss. So we see just a couple of things, and one is just so powerful here, and that is that what we're called to do is by the grace that's given to us. It's a grace gift. It's not a brilliance gift. It's not a formula. That planting the church is being a co-worker with God. It's not about being a genius. It's simply about partnering, as he said, a co-laborer with God who knows how to build a team, sowers, waterers, so forth, and who simply labors in the power of the Holy Spirit, knowing it's not what I do. It's God who gives the increase. It's God who does this. We simply partner with him. You know what I love about multiplication is that Jesus is the one who's doing it. Jesus is the one who said, I will build my church and the gates of hell. We're not building churches. We are simply facilitating the church builder who is building. The Bible says God brings together people and their gifts as it pleases him. Jesus said very clearly that when you initiate my strategy, he says, in Matthew 28:20, he says, when you go forth, when you make disciples, when you build a church, which I said is people who are gathered to learn how to obey the commands of Jesus and to take his gospel to the world. As you gather in this, he says, and as you go and do this, wherever you go and do it, however you go and do it, I want you to know something. I am with you to the end of the age. And in Mark's gospel, he says, and I will confirm your work with miracles, with signs, with wonders. And I can say honestly that I think that I am a good example because I feel like I was the least of the qualified. And I'll tell you more about that. But it's God who's doing his work. It's learning how to find the grace of God. It's learning to stay under the spout where the glory comes out. It's learning to receive his grace over and over when you want to quit. It's learning how to hear the Holy Spirit and just follow obedient when you don't know how you're going to do this, when you don't know what the next step is. It's being a person of prayer who leans upon God and lets God birth things. Like I say, it's a pregnancy. God births it in you, and you just manage until he gives full birth. The vision to this class is also not just information, but it's to bring mentoring. And one of the things I'm excited, like no other class, I believe we're going to draw people from Mexico, Philippines, Zambia, all over the world. And one of the goals of this class is to help people who are already pastors, who have a burden to mentor others, who have this same calling. And we're going to find pastors who want to mentor others, and hopefully the material we're going to give, they can use. In fact, this class will be done in Spanish by Pastor Bernabe Casillas on Thursday, the same material. And in each case, we hope to have breakout session and identify pastors who are training other leaders to become spiritual multipliers in their church, in their nations, or their cities all over the world. It is going to be a focus to fulfill what I believe is the call of God, how to be a hero maker. And I just love this phrase, hero maker. I was just reading a book called Hero Maker, just a tremendous book by author Dave Ferguson that I so want to recommend to you. And he says that the key in this multiplication process is you go from being a hero to being a hero maker. Go from being the person doing the ministry to discovering the hero in other people and raising them up. And everything I'm going to teach you is not only for my desire to raise you up, but for you to then be able to find the hero in others and to very simply raise them up. And I think it's just going to be incredible. You know, one of the things in this book, he shared so challenging about precious Pastor Ralph Moore, who has the Hope Chapel churches, and just a very ordinary pastor, but focused from the beginning of his ministry just on multiplying instead of just being a big church or something, and talks about how now there are 23,000 churches that have been planted. And it just inspired me. And at the end, he says, And what I want you to do is to dream your biggest dream, because you are doing what God is doing in the earth. You are not, this is not your idea. This is what Jesus is doing in the earth. He's multiplying the seed. He's building up for the last end time harvest. He needs millions of churches. He needs millions of spiritual entrepreneurs. You know, as I said, every village, the Lord told me, and I just began weeping just recently. He says, Dale, what you have, the DNA, Heart for the World, there needs to be churches like yours in millions of places where there's no church right now. There's no one taking the gospel, bringing revival, bringing the power of God, teaching the word. And that's the vision of this. A huge part of it is also to create a network of friends. We have learned from the beginning that churches multiply through collaboration. I know someone who knows someone, and I believe through this effort we're going to collaborate with pastors all over the world, and we're going to help them. We're going to multiply with them. We're going to connect them with others who can help them and plant their churches. So how the class will work? Well, as you see, I'm doing this YouTube. So the class will actually be made available on the Monday before the Saturday class. And that way, ideally, people here, and no matter what time zone they're in, they can watch it. There will also be some questions, and as well as notes that will be sent out that you can get by emailing, or you can also always find them on my on dalewalker.life. If you go to my blog, dalewalker.life, we'll put them on there as well. And so the beautiful thing about that is you'll be able to listen to it, and we'll be able to give more time in the class time to actually questions and answer, mentoring, breakout discussion, helping people actually develop the plans for what they're going to multiply. So let me today just briefly introduce the first topic, and we'll just get started and we'll talk about it more. We're going to go right to the foundation. And as we said, as the Bible said, it's so important that you build on the right foundation. If it's not built with Christ in the middle, when it gets tested, it's going to fall apart. And I believe at the heart of that is something called vision and calling. That when God is going to raise up something on the earth, the language of heaven is vision. He gives a picture to someone, and that picture gets shared and it catches fire in hearts. I love this verse in Proverbs 29:18. In the Message translation, you know, in the King James, it's without a vision, the people perish. In the Message translation, it says, when people can't see what God is doing, they stumble over themselves. But when they discover and attend to what God is revealing, they become most blessed. I am convinced that the Spirit is pouring out visions like never before. Acts 2, talks about the last days. I'm going to pour out my Spirit. I'm going to give visions. Your young men shall see visions. And your daughters shall prophesy. Now, a vision is a picture that creates passion of a preferable future and unites people to work together for a greater cause. It is something that God puts in a leader's heart that they become responsible for. And when they share it, it resonates in a group of people and allows them to cooperate towards fulfilling and achieving a better world and kingdom agendas upon the earth. It is a roadmap to the pot of gold of what God is doing in the earth. It is so important because the future right now is being created inside of the heart, the spirit, and the imagination of people just like you. It is so important that you learn to visionize. You learn to let the Spirit articulate and let you see what God sees of a future that He wants you to be a part of creating. You've heard the story, and I just love it, of they were celebrating the opening of Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida. Walt Disney had died, And in the ceremony, Walt Disney's wife was helping dedicate it, and someone said, boy, it's too bad that Walt wasn't around to see this day. And her comment was, Walt did see this day, that's why it happened. And why something happens out in the world always is because of something someone saw in their spirit. A calling is right alongside a vision, but a calling is a conviction, a compelling, driving conviction that they need to do something to change the world. It is a deep, make a difference passion. When you have a calling, I like to describe a calling as something I cannot not do. And I believe everyone has a calling. And it's absolutely essential that we work into what you're calling. You know, Jesus, when he was 12 years old, said, I must be about my Father's business. And he knew that it was teaching the word. Jeremiah said, the calling is something you are set apart from your mother's womb. It is something that's in your DNA. It is something so basic to who you are. And I want us to unpack that because what I believe about something like church multiplication, it has to be a calling. In fact, I thought of entitling this message, If You Can Do Anything Else, Do It, because that's what a mentor told me. I said, how do you know if you're supposed to go plant a church or be a missionary or be a preacher, whatever? He said, well, what I do know is if you can do anything else, go do that. Why? Because unless this is in your bones, unless it's a got to do it, you will quit. You will give up because you will not find that always it's working the way you thought it would. And so we want to clarify. Now, I put that these two go together. Some people get a vision and it becomes a calling. Some people get a calling. They don't know exactly the plan. They just know to step out. I'm going to do interviews. I'm going to have interviews throughout this class with different kinds of spiritual entrepreneurs. Many just started to be moved by a burden. Somebody's got to do something about that. I love the story of a man named Rob who was going to his office and he got in the wrong lane, took a wrong turn, and he ended up shot because he was in one of the most poor crime-ridden neighborhoods in his city. He didn't even know it was there. And he saw some people using drugs and gangsters, and he saw traffic and prostitution, and he saw this chaos, kids out of school. And he just parked his car and started weeping. And before the end of the day, he found his calling. And God used him to transform that neighborhood. Let me just say about calling. Calling will be tested, and we're going to talk about that as a church planner. You never know if you've really got the calling until you have a great reason to quit. And Jesus would always put a price tag on a calling. He would go in Matthew 4 to his original disciples who were fishermen, some of them, and he said, if you will leave your nets behind and follow me, I will make you fishers of men. That was the first time he called in the New Testament. It's going to cost you something. Some people weren't willing. He told a rich young ruler, sell what you have. Come follow me. And he wouldn't do it. But there's going to be this, and we've got to know this, and I want to unpack that in our discussion, that you're going to be tested. You're going to sense a calling. This might be my purpose. And then you're going to step out in some way, and you're going to realize what it's going to cost you. My very first calling, the Burgess High School. I was a Christian, but I was a secret Christian. And people thought I was kind of cool, and I was all right. And the Lord said, you cannot hide your lamp. And I remember I felt embarrassed, but God told me, I got this T-shirt, Jesus Freak thing, and a big family Bible, and I just decided to take a big stand for Jesus. It cost me. I found out I never had to leave old friends. They all just left me. But when I paid that price, I remember when I first went into missions, it was such a warfare time. I can't even tell you. I'll tell you someday. But But I get on the plane to go to the Philippines. As I'm on the plane, my wife has a miscarriage. I get to the airport, lose my passport. I have to come home. And there's this test. Don't go back. Your wife needs you. This. But she encourages me. And I say, God, no matter what it costs, I'm going to fulfill this calling to this nation of the Philippines. And God did so much because of that. Another key to calling and vision is that it often requires a long period in which God calls you into a time of waiting in obscurity, especially into a call to serve another person's vision. I believe one of the most important things about successful plants or entrepreneurs is overcoming what many of this kind of a personality has, which is an independent, lone ranger, do it on my own attitude. And for God to use us, he needs to call us to serve. In Luke chapter 16, verse 12, it says, and if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? Stewardship is the heartbeat of the kingdom. It is not about a stage. It is not about a reputation. It is not about success. It is about faithfulness. And we learn faithfulness like Elisha did, washing the hands of Elijah, serving another ministry. Too many people who are called to be entrepreneurs leave instead of becoming sent. They don't understand a basic principle of multiplication, and that is to honor your spiritual father and mother. That is to be sent out. That is to serve under. That is to wait and to receive the blessing of spiritual authority. Too many people go out as what I call opportunists, not as servants. They're going to make a name. They're going to do something great. But they haven't developed the humility to just serve under another ministry. There are a lot that goes out from Abraham versus a Jacob who wants the blessing. They're a Cain instead of a Seth, a Gehazi instead of Elisha. And they often bring division. This was one of the biggest tests in my life. I was called and I was serving in my father's church. And I said, I'm ready to go do this. And the Lord said, lay down your agenda. Well, I have a call. You gave me a vision to plant a church. Lay it down and just serve your father. Just be faithful. And it was amazing when he finally came to me and affirmed that God had put that on me. And God was able to send me. And so it was so beautiful because the fruit, it wasn't about me leaving him. It was about me bringing more spiritual grandchildren into the kingdom for him and others who had sent me out. Another big thing is the key to a calling is, I said earlier, something on the inside of a complete surrender and a complete commitment. I believe that all true ministries that are birthed from the Spirit involve a death. Jesus said in John 12:24, unless a seed falls in the ground and dies, it bears alone, no fruit. But if it dies, then it bears much fruit. There has got to be this complete surrender. This is not like starting a business where the goal is to be successful. This is about giving birth to something that's sacred, that God is doing in the earth. And it requires a signing. I like to say it requires like signing a blank check and giving it to God. Say, you fill in the details. All that I am, all that I have, all that you want me to be. There is always somehow where you burn the bridge behind you. I love this quote I read many years ago. Until I'm committed, there's a hesitancy, a holding back. But the moment I am fully committed, a whole stream of people, opportunities, and resources I could have never dreamed of start to come my way. In every calling, there has been this, what I call, put all your money, all your chips in the middle and go for the broke. And It meant moving to the city without a job. It meant always being all in. That's a part of calling. Another part of that is when we do that, it releases passion. And again, I can't tell you how important passion is for birthing ministry. John Wesley told those first evangelists of the Methodist Church, the secret to spreading revival and starting churches is setting yourself on fire, and people will come to watch you burn. The key is people seeing that you are doing what God's called you with such passion that you are all in. Someone said, nobody wants to bet on you until they know you've completely bet on yourself and the call that God has for your life. It is a relentless passion to fulfill what the Spirit of God has put on your life. That's calling. Now, vision is more like the blueprints. Habakkuk 2:2 says, write down the vision and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. The vision is for an appointed time. Though it be delayed, you must wait for it shall surely come to pass. Early in my calling, God gave me a vision, and it set the tone for my life. I didn't know till later that it was Acts 26:18, which is to turn them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God, to teach them how to have an inheritance among the citizens of light. And the vision was literally of people blindfolded walking off a cliff into hellfire and hearing Jesus saying, run, take the blindfolds off. Tell them to look over here. And when I looked over there, there was Jesus with his arms and his nail prints. Tell them to run to me. And I began to run and rip off the blindfolds. And God said, this is what you'll do with the rest of your life. That led me to say, well, how will I do it? And then the vision came. In that point, it was go to Northeast El Paso. And it was a specific word. Bring them to my heart. I will heal them. I will train them and raise them up to become a mighty army that will touch and change the city and the nations of the world. The key is vision is to create his glory. There is a reason for this that is why this is so compelling. It cannot simply be, well, this is a good way to do nice things. No, this is a desperately needed thing to turn the lives of people from death to life, from eternal damnation. It has to be in the deepest part of us what we are doing. It has to be a kingdom vision. By the way, vision is always subservient to the vision of our King. His vision is the bigger picture of which our vision fits. In fact, his vision is for us to fit into that vision that he has to see his kingdom come. The Moravians would say it this way, to see the Lamb of God receive the fruit of his suffering. It has to tie. It has to be about the kingdom, not about us, not about competition. And I love to challenge people. Is it a kingdom vision? That means you don't care who gets the success. You're willing to be a part of what God's doing in a city. You're excited if someone else gets more people than you because it's a kingdom vision. It's not about a denomination. It's not about a brand. It's not about you knowing that you were successful. It's about the King of Kings being honored and glorified, and you complimenting and fitting in to a part of it. Finally, let me just mention there are 3 components in the vision, 4 components in developing the vision. There's the revelation stage, the confirmation stage, the articulation stage, and then the activation stage. And we'll break this down more next week. But the revelation stage is when God is awakening. He's calling you. He's stirring this. In this stage, prayer becomes the center of your activity. You feel like God is speaking. Now you set yourself apart and you spend time waiting on God, hearing God until it goes deep into your heart. Acts chapter 13 speaks of the vision of Paul, and it says he not only prayed, but he gathered the elders and teachers and prophets there in Antioch. And as they were waiting and ministering to the Lord said, set apart Paul and Barnabas for the work that I've called them to. It's the stage where God begins to give you a clear picture, and that picture becomes confirmed. The confirmation stage is often when God gives you the witness of through other people, through circumstances you wouldn't have expected. Don't take shortcuts. I remember I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, what am I going to do? And he says, wait. And I remember that first church, wait till I send you 10 people that are on fire that want to do this together. And it was like a fleece. That was going to happen. Wait until I move in your wife's heart. I said, God, you're big enough to speak to my wife and me. And all of a sudden she had this joy to go to Northeast El Paso. I knew God was working. I kept waiting. And finally, I remember getting a call. I was doing a radio show, and someone said, I'm from Northeast El Paso. I believe you're supposed to come. We have a building you can use in Northeast El Paso. And all of a sudden, it came together. The revelation and the confirmation stage. Then the articulation stage, where we learn to put into words the vision, to make it plain. And this is an extremely important process. Here, we apply what God's put in our hearts to the needs of the community we're called to reach. We investigate, we research, we find everything we can about the people that God has called us to. We go deep inside of us. There's 3 parts to this stage: looking in, looking up, and then looking out. What has God made us? We'll talk about values next week. What has God put on our heart that's unique in our DNA that we're to do and share? What is God saying about the people that we're called? Who are they? What do they look like? What are their needs? What is their hurts? What does this church look like in 5 years? What does this ministry look like? How I share with other people what this is supposed to be and this is supposed to do. At this stage, we gather with a team because we want them to own it as much as we own it. We dream together. We ask questions like, God, if you were to do the greatest thing that you want to do to save people through us, what would that look like? God, what are the team members' gifts and talents? How do they fit into this bigger picture? You try to simplify into a word or 2 words the kind of church this is going to be, what it's going to be about. And one of the goals of having you read one of these books is you'll see how many other people did this. Right now, one of those key words we use is to help people know God, find freedom, discover their purpose, and make a difference. You try to ways to say it so the vision becomes clear when you share it with others. You go deep into the planning and talk about what things could look like and what things you should ask God for. I'm going to show you a tool that Rick Warren developed in starting a ministry. All the list of questions you can ask God, and you can work at imagining for Him to speak more clearly to you about. This stage, as I said, as it goes deeper and deeper, it prepares you more and more for the last stage, which is activation. When you speak the word of faith, and we'll talk about this, when you announce, this is what God has called me to do, this is when I'm going to do it, and this is what is going to happen. I can't wait to hear your vision. And the questions today are going to be for you to just talk about what is the thing, if you could do anything for God and knew you couldn't fail and knew that money wasn't an issue, what would you love to attempt to God? What would a possible dream that you would love to see to create something that God uses in the earth to reach thousands of people for His glory? What would that look like? What is in your heart? And then I'm going to ask you, if you have something like that, to just write as if you were writing in a newspaper article what this vision looks like 5 years from now, what God did, what God said. And we'll discuss the steps towards making that happen. Let me pray for you. Lord, bless the students, each one of them. Give them clarity about their calling and vision, that they could raise up the greatest works the world has seen. In Jesus' name, amen.